Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Today, we are witnessing a moment that has reshaped the global landscape, an event that was not only unexpected, but deeply symbolic. The news of Yemen launching a covert submarine strike has sent shockwaves through international political and military circles. This is not simply a headline. This is a sign, an indication that the world we once believed was predictable is shifting. And we must understand why. Yemen's secret submarine strike did not merely surprise the world, it disrupted an entire framework of global assumptions. For years, major intelligence agencies, defense analysts, and geopolitical strategists had operated under the belief that Yemen lacked the industrial infrastructure, financial stability, and technical expertise required to maintain advanced underwater naval systems. Yet this event has revealed something far more complex, a strategic recalibration happening in silence, behind blockades, beneath satellite surveillance, far away from diplomatic summits. And the most striking part of this development is not the submarine itself, but the intelligence failures surrounding it. How did the world's most powerful surveillance networks miss it? How did conventional analysis misread Yemen's evolving capability? And more importantly, what else has been overlooked? From the viewpoint of global power structures, the submarine strike is not simply a weapon deployment. It is a symbolic break in the narrative of dominance. For decades, powerful nations have relied on the notion that military superiority guarantees predictability. They believed that countries under pressure would remain weakened, fragmented, and strategically transparent. Yet, Yemen's action delivers a severe and direct message of strength can emerge where it is least expected, particularly where necessity fuels innovation. It forces the question, what happens when the underestimated gather the will to resist? This is the kind of moment that shifts historical timelines. The shock among major powers is not rooted in the damage of the attack, but in the strategic intelligence gap it exposed. Modern warfare is not merely fought on the battlefield, it is fought through information dominance. Satellites map coastlines, drones patrol sea routes, and advanced signals intelligence tracks communications. Yet somehow a submarine, a vessel that requires sophisticated engineering, logistical secrecy, and secure command coordination was prepared, hidden, and deployed without detection. That alone challenges the logic and credibility of global intelligence networks. It exposes a new vulnerability, not of Yemen, but of those who assumed they were always watching. This development also reveals how pressure can breed sophistication. Yemen has long been depicted as a nation struggling under humanitarian crisis and political instability. However, history shows that nations under siege often develop alternative systems of resilience. When conventional pathways to defense and growth are blocked, societies turn inward, innovate, improvise, and create solutions born from urgency rather than luxury. This submarine is not just a machine, it is a testimony to adaptive resistance. It says, in effect, we may be constrained, but we are not defeated. That alone is a geopolitical statement louder than any televised speech or diplomatic document. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect for powerful states is the psychological dimension. Superpowers rely on predictability. They rely on knowing where threats come from, how capable they are, and how to prevent them. When a smaller nation demonstrates the ability to surprise, it reshapes deterrence. It introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is the one thing global powers cannot easily manage. The question now becomes, how do these nations adapt to a reality where even those considered militarily weak may hold strategic capabilities unseen and unexpected? This is where the shockwave truly lies, in the dismantling of assumed superiority. If Yemen can develop and conceal a submarine strike capability, what does that imply about the strategic trajectories of other underestimated nations? What new alliances may be emerging quietly? What technologies may be circulating in closed networks away from Western oversight? The geopolitical landscape has not merely shifted, it has widened. And so, The world is left with a question that echoes louder than the event itself. What else is happening beneath the surface that we have not seen yet? Because when the unseen becomes visible, power must be reconsidered, and the world right now is reconsidering. The regional balance of power in the Red Sea and Gulf has always been shaped by naval superiority, trade route control, and international military presence. For decades, this balance seemed firmly set, with well-equipped states and global naval forces maintaining dominance. However, Yemen's unexpected deployment of a functioning submarine capability has introduced a new variable into this equation, one that challenges not only strategic assumptions, but also the psychology of power in the region. Suddenly, the waters once thought to be fully monitored and controlled are no longer predictable. And unpredictability in geopolitics is a force of its own. The shock is not only about the submarine strike itself, but what it symbolizes: that the region can no longer be navigated with old maps. Something fundamental has shifted. This event forces every neighboring state and global actor to reassess how they approach maritime security. Sea routes in the Red Sea are not casual highways. They are core arteries of global energy transport, commercial trade, and military positioning. A disruption here, even symbolic, can ripple outward into global markets and diplomatic relations. Yemen's action suggests the emergence of a deterrent system grounded not in equal power, but in the capacity to surprise. That changes everything. A predictable enemy is manageable, but an adversary capable of unconventional strategy introduces a new strategic anxiety. And when anxiety enters the calculus of state decisions, policy changes follow. The shift is not only military, but psychological and diplomatic. Regional states that once viewed Yemen primarily as a humanitarian crisis or internal conflict zone must now engage with a new reality. Yemen holds influence, leverage, and the ability to impose consequences. Influence in geopolitics is not always measured by economic strength or fleet size. It is measured by the ability to change the choices of others. Yemen has demonstrated that it can do precisely that. Even a single effective submarine positioned strategically can require neighboring militaries to divert resources, adjust patrol routes, reorganize naval command systems, and increase intelligence spending. And in the world of strategy, forcing your opponent to spend more to counter you is already a form of victory. This shift is amplified by a deeper symbolic signal. The era where only the wealthiest nations controlled strategic waterways is ending. If Yemen can assert presence in these waters, then smaller nations, non-aligned states, and resistance movements worldwide are watching very closely. The message is powerful. You do not need to match a superpower's arsenal to influence a superpower's behavior. You only need to introduce uncertainty into their sphere of confidence. And once uncertainty enters the system, even dominant powers must slow down, rethink, verify, and recalculate. In geopolitical strategy, slowing your opponent, even without defeating them outright, is a significant achievement. There is also a cultural and psychological layer to this moment. For years, international narratives painted Yemen as a passive victim of conflict, but narratives shape expectations, and expectations shape decisions. When a country breaks the narrative constructed about it, it reclaims agency. This submarine event is not just a technical feat, it is a rewriting of identity on the geopolitical stage. And identity is not a small matter. It determines who is heard, who is ignored, who is feared, and who is negotiated with. Yemen is now entering negotiations, not from a place of vulnerability, but from a position of demonstrated capability. That is a profound shift. The world is now watching, analyzing, recalculating. Military think tanks are drafting new risk models. Naval command centers are restructuring operational patterns. Diplomats are adjusting language. every significant shift in regional dynamics begins not with overwhelming displays of force, but with moments like this, moments where the assumed order is quietly but unmistakably rearranged. And while powerful nations may still hold larger fleets and sophisticated technology, they now face a new reality. The waters they once believed they controlled are no longer unquestioned territory. The submarine strike, beyond its tactical and strategic implications, carries a deeply symbolic message of political resistance and national self-assertion. Yemen's move was not only a military action, but a declaration of identity, an identity that refuses to be defined by crisis narratives, foreign intervention, or global media portrayals. For years, international discourse has spoken about Yemen, around Yemen, and over Yemen, but rarely to Yemen. This event shifts that dynamic. It communicates, without a single speech or diplomatic statement, that Yemen retains the will and the capability to respond, to adapt, and to declare that it cannot be sidelined or diminished. And it is in this subtle shift in tone, intention, and posture that the true weight of the event resides. Because when a nation long assumed to be powerless chooses to speak in the language of deterrence, the world must pause and listen. This is not simply an act of defiance, it is an assertion of political presence. The submarine strike is a message directed not only at military powers, but at global policy makers who believed Yemen was a passive arena of conflict rather than an actor with agency. It challenges the belief that external forces could dictate outcomes without encountering resistance. It tells the world, we are not objects in someone else's strategy. We are participants. We are decision makers. We are here. And when a nation that has endured conflict, sanctions, humanitarian devastation, and geopolitical pressure still finds a way to signal its sovereignty, the message resonates far beyond the battlefield. There is a psychological dimension to this message as well. Nations demonstrate power in many forms, through diplomacy, through economics, through culture, and yes, through military action. But the most compelling displays of power are those that emerge against expectation. When the world assumes weakness and encounters resilience instead, a narrative is broken. And when a narrative breaks, so do the assumptions that support it. This is the emotional impact of the submarine strike. It forces the world to re-evaluate Yemen not as a place defined by suffering, but as a nation capable of shaping its own strategic destiny. The symbolism becomes even stronger when viewed from within Yemen itself. Acts like these reinforce internal unity, pride, and national identity. Societies do not endure years of hardship without psychological consequences. Morale becomes fragile, identity becomes contested. But when a nation demonstrates capability that was thought impossible, it reignites collective confidence. It tells its people, we have not been defeated. We are still standing. This matters because political power is not only what a state projects outward, but what it strengthens inward. Internal belief is a form of power, often underestimated yet fundamental in sustaining long-term resilience. And beyond Yemen's borders, the message reverberates through the global south, through non-aligned movements, through regions where nations have faced similar pressures from larger geopolitical players. They are watching, they are taking notes. Because the lesson here is not that Yemen has submarines, it is that resistance evolves. Power adapts. Capability does not always require abundance. It requires determination, patience, and the ability to operate outside the expectations of stronger states. The world's major powers understand this clearly, which is why this event has triggered not just military concern, but political discomfort. The hooks embedded in this moment are unmistakable. What happens when those considered weak refuse to remain silent? How do global powers negotiate with a nation that rewrites its own narrative? What shifts occur when sovereignty is defended not with speeches, but with strategy? This submarine strike has changed not just the strategic environment, but the story of Yemen on the world stage. And once a story changes, the future that follows changes with it. Global diplomatic responses to Yemen's submarine strike have been marked by a mixture of caution, urgency, and strategic calculation. The event did not simply trigger military alerts. It initiated a wave of high-level consultations across capitals and defense ministries around the world. When a nation believed to be strategically limited demonstrates a capability that was previously dismissed as unattainable, governments are forced to re-examine their assumptions, their alliances, and their long-term regional policies. The submarine strike has placed world powers in a position where silence is no longer an option, yet direct confrontation is equally risky. The diplomatic stage has become a careful balancing act where every statement must be measured, every decision weighted, and every consequence anticipated. This development has created a moment of global hesitation because now every major government must decide how to interpret Yemen's message. Some may view it through the lens of national defense, others through geopolitical influence, and others still through the economic implications tied to trade routes and resource transportation. The Red Sea and Gulf region are not simply geographical spaces, they are arteries of global commerce. Any disruption, even the threat of disruption, sends signals to markets, investors, and military coalitions. And so the diplomatic question becomes, how does one respond to a state that has just proven it can influence global maritime security? This is where diplomacy becomes a contest of narratives. Powerful nations are now working to shape the international interpretation of the event. Some may attempt to frame the submarine strike as destabilizing or provocative. Others may emphasize Yemen's right to defend its sovereignty. Meanwhile, states with competing regional interests will evaluate whether this development threatens or benefits their strategic position. Every country's public statement will be tailored not to truth alone, but to geopolitical advantage. Because in global politics, language is a weapon, one that can justify alliances, sanctions, negotiations, or military presence. Behind closed doors, diplomatic negotiations are undoubtedly underway. Governments are requesting intelligence reevaluations, naval alliances are discussing route protection, and international organizations are assessing whether this event could escalate into broader conflict. Yet none of this is announced publicly. The world sees only the polished press statements, calm, controlled, cautious, but beneath them are questions that carry far more weight. What is Yemen's true military capacity? Is this an isolated capability or the beginning of a strategic shift? Which nation supported or enabled this development? These are the questions that determine international posture, and they are being asked urgently. At the same time, Yemen's action places pressure on those who have historically intervened or influenced internal dynamics in the region. If Yemen possesses the ability to impose strategic consequences, then external interference becomes far more costly. This changes the diplomatic leverage in future negotiations over territory, aid, sanctions, maritime control, and political recognition. A nation that can defend itself, even in limited but strategic ways, is a nation that must be spoken with, not spoken over. This is the shift, the subtle but undeniable transition from Yemen being treated as a subject of international policy to being treated as a participant in it. The emotional undercurrent in global capitals is not loud, but it is real surprise. Because this event suggests that the era of assumed dominance in the region has fractured. And once fractured, the old diplomatic frameworks no longer apply cleanly. New agreements must be considered. New calculations must be drafted. New respect must be negotiated, whether willingly or reluctantly. The hooks hidden within this geopolitical moment are powerful and unmissable. What happens when a nation believed to be silent finds its voice? How do global powers respond when the script they wrote is no longer being followed? What shifts unfold when sovereignty is enforced not through request, but through capability? The world is not just reacting to a submarine strike, it is reacting to the emergence of a new diplomatic reality, one that will shape the next chapter of global politics in the region and beyond.